course, it's men, they're babies anyway.
110%.
Yeah.
A minute ago. We're good now.
It is 12 o'clock, and we will call this Planning and Zoning meeting to order. First on the agenda was zoning code changes. We all got copies at our last meeting. And Matt, I don't know how you wanted to kind of run through this, or
So I think I was just, I guess, ready to take questions from you guys.
they're very good. Let's start with A1.
And if I may, just though, to kind of frame up the conversation as well, what I think Matt and I would like to see happen following today's meeting is your kind of support for us to put we need to go through and just kind of clean up some of the grammatical issues, misspellings, that. But then what we'd like to do is put a draft version of it on the website with an ability for folks to submit a form to the committee with feedback. We would then collect that feedback up until about February 3rd, which would be the Friday before your next kind of regularly scheduled meeting. We could then review that kind of public feedback to incorporate any changes that we may like to see. And then we could move forward as appropriate from that time, either with scheduling a public meeting or kind of sending out any other updates, with the thought that we would then kind of vote it out of committee if appropriate in March to go to City Planning Commission for discussion.
Generally speaking, that seems like a good plan.
Okay.
So
On A1,
yeah,
I kind of wondered what you gave the description, the explanation of this as a transitional. Yet when I read it, it almost looks like we're trying to have this as like why is a permitted use in agriculture a park? We wouldn't make it a park. We would rezone the park to be O1 or P1, whatever the park zoning is. And same for, while a single family dwelling is fine, why would you have daycares in a agriculture? You wouldn't build a daycare in an agriculture. You would rezone it to be something that has agricultural, and then like the approval of all these other things, cemetery government uses. No, that wouldn't be in an agricultural district. You would rezone. So it's kind of like we're mixing the plans here. And to me, agriculture is, as you described it at the last meeting, as a transitional thing. It's something to be able to offer protection to existing farms that we are annexing in for potential future use, and that they can still do their business, their agricultural-based business. But it isn't a, because I would look at this and say, hey, why can't I just change the zoning of my house on South Main to be, agricultural, other than I understand it doesn't have the yardage stuff, but so I looked through that, and there was my questions.
so these are all similar uses that are permitted in R1, R2, and R3, the single family residential. We don't have a governmental uses zoning code or zoning category. We do have a park category. I was just keeping it consistent with what a single family home zoning is permitted. I don't have any issue removing daycare, but daycare is permitted in R1, R2, and R3. So that's really why this list is pretty much catered towards, we have agricultural farm activities, sale of farm products grown or raised on the premise, and then we have nursery at the bottom, and then pretty much everything else is exactly the same as R1, R2, and R3.
And I understand that, but the minute we start using R1, R2, R3 uses on a property, we would rezone the property R1, R2, R3 as appropriate, and let them and treat it as such. I mean, the thought is that if we're going to make this transition-ish oriented zoning, don't make it so broad.
So I think we can clean up the language to better define it. I think one of the, as Matt mentioned, I think the intent is that those were home-based items. So if you had a residential property on it that you were operating a daycare facility out of, we don't want to negate that by having this, you know, your agricultural because you have a home on a large property. But I think we can clean that up to specify that it's not just a, hey, this, we don't want it to be a catch-all. I think it was kind of your concern.
Yeah, and that's my concern. I was also wondering about, would you look at the ability to look at existing, within the existing city of Findlay, are there places that might say, gosh, it behooves me to rezone to agriculture, or is the required 5-acre minimum lot size such that that there are no properties that would fit that, which then would beget, okay, I want an agricultural designation, and I want a variance on the 5 acres. I only have 4,321.5 acres, but I have a big garden and I sell the stuff out of my garden, so I should be agricultural.
So, and that's kind of where I point back to R1, R2, and R3, in that the only thing you're gaining is the ability to have a nursery, which is a conditional use. The only thing you're gaining is technically agricultural farm activities. There's one thing to consider, and I think it would probably be so, but in the proposed farm animal ordinance, subjecting that A1 agricultural properties are exempt from those standards. In terms of 5 acres or more, I mean, there would be very few. My guess would be there would be less than 10 properties that we would care if they were made agricultural. You know, if someone has a 20-acre field next to, you know, on the north side that's in the city, and it's, you know, there's been corn grown on it for the last 30 years, and there's still, you know, I don't necessarily mind that it's being, if it had R1 or agricultural zoning. And the other point is, you know, as outlined and kind of really highlighted, is that with this proposed, with all these changes, we're not proposing to change one parcel zoning. So if we adopt this, no parcels in the city of Findlay are being changed. And the second thing that, you know, was really driven home during the rezoning on the south side for the McDonald's is that the city giving someone someone does not have a right to a zoning category. If we create an A1 and I want it, I don't have a right to it. It's purely at the discretion of the city of Findlay. And so at that point, the 10 members of city council would look at that and make a decision, is this appropriate? And if it's not appropriate, then you have every right to say no. Yes, Holly?
That statement, I mean, people have a right to their zoning when they purchase a property. So if they purchase something commercial, they purchase something residential or a duplex or agriculture, they're purchasing it with the assurance that they're going to be able to develop it that way. So when you say,
but you don't, so your home is, let's say you own 10 acres and it's zoned I1 light industrial. Yes, you have a right to all those things. The legal standing that I1 gives you, the permitted uses and all those standards. But what you don't have a right to is like, well, I want to change it to apartments.
No, it has to go through the process.
That's a
to see if
request of the city, and it's at the city's discretion. So after the adoption of this, there will be exactly 0 parcels zoned A1, and any future parcels will be at the discretion of city council and planning commission.
So the properties, for instance, we have some cows over by Sixth Street Park, a small thing. We have some people that like to garden in they have a larger lot.
Sure.
There's no benefit to change them to agriculture. There's no disadvantage to keep them where they're at. So
I would
when
say,
Grant talks about all these little extra pieces that are part of it, does it need to be there? Or are we simply focusing on the north side of Findlay and the farming that you want to annex in for possible economic development?
so I would say, to the folks that have a few horses or things in town, and they request agricultural, my staff report would look at it, but a few that I'm thinking of, my recommendation would be no. Because agricultural comes with an exemption from any regulations, zoning regulations for farm animals. So that would be my concern, with giving them that. Be it the south side, the east side, the west side, you know, and in some ways, so those circumstances, you know, someone has 5.5 acres smack dab in the city of Findlay, I would be against giving them agricultural zoning. Someone has 55 acres or 110 acres on the edge of town, I would be more open in thinking that's appropriate. Does that answer your question?
It does, but so if they're on the edge now, but in 10 or 20 years, they might not be on the edge. And there's no benefit for somebody to rezone to agriculture. So somebody who has 5.1 acres and has horses, what would be the benefit for them to request that from you, from us?
If we adopt farm animal standards, it would be, they may be encouraged, they may be incentivized to apply for that, to get out of that.
So they would be exempt from.
Yeah, I think the big thing is the parcel size. You know, typically if you have a property that's 5 acres, you're better insulated so it's not impacting the surrounding properties. Going back to Grant's point about, and actually Holly, you may have mentioned it as well, you know, people that have a large garden on their property. Well, you can do that in the city of Findlay, not negatively. This is really geared towards large parcels of property that, and yes, the original intent is related to properties that are adjacent to the city that may want to maintain their agricultural status and annex into the city, which would create I hate this word, contiguity, continuity, but that's not the actual proper term when we're talking about contiguous parcels. But it's a very tricky thing. For that then opens up, you know, development or, you know, opportunities around them.
So I see, you know, in the next 5 years, do I see 4, 5, 6, 7 parcels being zoned agricultural? I mean, that's kind of the extent that I look at. And then, you know, one scenario that we've kind of brushed across is, as we talked with annexation, you know, a company's coming to Findlay, they want to be in Findlay, they want the benefit of the CRA, they want the benefit of the city fire and city police, and they want all those benefits, but there is a parcel in between them and the city, and they're not contiguous. And the parcel in between them is a family farm, and they're like, we wouldn't mind being in the city, but we need guarantees that I can have my horses, and I can have my extra barns, and I can still farm. Now, I can sit here and say, logically, we're not going to go after you for growing corn on your property, but that's kind of a handshake. And so this also provides some assurance to someone who's hesitant, who has farming and is hesitant to go into the city, that they can still continue to be a farm into the future.
And I think we agree. think there's agreement on this, and I appreciate you clarifying that we don't see people rezoning to this. And your example makes sense. My concern in it is that with as much as it was allowed, is that you bring in that property on the outskirts, make it agriculture, and they start developing it based on all the things in there that they're allowed to do. When they do that, they really lose their agricultural zoning and should be then zoned appropriately with other Findlay items, or Findlay. And I mean, if you made everything, if you annex, if when you annex them and you give them an agriculture and they have a daycare on it, fine. That's, I mean, when we bring them in, they can use their property as they are currently using it. But if you bring in the family farm and then they decide to put on a to put on a group home, a community center, and
Sure.
then at that point in time, they're basically saying, hey, I'm not using this as agricultural, so let's zone them appropriately. I appreciate you taking a look at it.
Yep.
I don't know if anybody else has any.
No,
thoughts on that?
I'm in agreement with you, Grant. So I will, the daycare is just, that's type B is strictly in-home with a maximum of 6. And that's only as a secondary use to a single-family home. But to your point, I don't know that we can't say government uses. I don't know. But there are some places of worship that's also a touchy freedom of religion type situation. But outdoor recreational facilities, public-private golf courses, group homes, emergency services, community center, those I think we can strike.
Yeah, I think you hear the where I'm going with that. Any thoughts on from anybody else? So is there for our next jump, anybody have a area they want to go talk about next?
One more question or comment under the agricultural side. We say 5-acre parcels or larger. Should we be saying a percentage of it has to be agricultural? So maybe you have a 5-acre lot and you're using a 1/2 acre as farming. Is that really agricultural? Or if they have a 50-acre lot and they're using 20 acres, I mean, should there be a number to determine that agricultural side to eliminate the concerns of what can be on the property and still keep it agricultural zoned? Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Because I feel like everything that Grant is pointing out with what, then it's not really agricultural. Well, depending on the size of the lot, it still might be the percentage to consider it agricultural.
I mean, I think that would be evaluated on a case-by-case basis when they ask for the conditional use, correct?
They're not asking for a conditional use.
I guess,
if
I
they
think
come
the
in with it.
easier is the fact that we have lot coverage restrictions. So even if they're only farming, 10% of it, and they only have developed, their house is 25% of it, do we care if the rest is wooded if it's a 5-acre lot?
I'm just saying if somebody gets annexed in and they do have a daycare on it, or they do have a nursery, or they do have an old church on it, or whatever it might be, well, in 5 or 10 years, or to say that we're going to let them in, zone them agricultural, but if we decide that they're not using enough of it later to be agricultural, you want to change them. So I think spelling out for them, we're going to annex you in, and this is what you have on your parcel currently, it meets the agricultural standard because the percentage of it being used for agricultural is this. Because those other things are not agricultural uses.
Well, conditional uses, though, are conditional, so they can be revoked at any time. So if they're not using it as that, and actually they don't even transfer with remind me, do they transfer with the property?
Conditional uses do.
But they could be revoked if
So
they're no longer operating.
I think I'm in full agreement. We'll sharpen, reduce the variety of things that can be developed. I think the other solution, is potentially raising it from 5 acres to 10 acres, just to give us a little more comfort. And then the third thing is, I do have confidence in the system, in that if someone that is barely, only has a little bit of agricultural use requests agricultural zoning, that the planning commission and city council are gonna be like, that's not.
And I wasn't focusing on people changing. I was focusing on bringing those into the city limits.
Sure. Yeah, we don't want to. Correct. So, and then the other, as the mayor pointed out, the other safeguard is lot coverage. So you've got 100 acres. Only 33 of that could be covered in, which sounds like, but I think that helps alleviate your concern that they're going to start developing stuff on it. So I will strike some of the uses, and I will look at and consider changing it from 5 to 10 acres using our GIS and what lots would be eligible.
Next topic, does anybody have this question's for you guys, if there's an area you want to discuss, or members of the committee.
Yeah, I don't think we had anything from our team. We just wanted to kind of hear any initial feedback. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, we would like to get it out for some initial public feedback so that we can continue to just kind of work through and refine it as appropriate to then look at adoption later this year.
Next on the list is the I3 large-scale industrial district.
Can you have you can have public streets in an I3, correct?
Yeah.
So, well, you could. But would you see? See, to me, I3, and like the. Could you see something like a benefit to an entire tall timbers type area, saying, hey, there's benefit in this I3. It gives me easier restriction, or it loosens restrictions on other things, and makes it on setbacks or other things, and makes it to a benefit for us to consider this entire property as one big I3. I guess I'm struggling with where I see I3 happening, and the benefit to it.
So, as it's written, I view I3 as a mechanism to effectively allow wind turbines, essentially to effectively allow wind turbines. And I say this because, the intent is we want to have control. We have several different routes we could go. We could just say there are no wind turbines in the city of Findlay. We could allow them in different ways. And I've looked at different ways to allow them. And the reason that I've looked at different ways to allow them is I've been in meetings and I've sat there with new companies looking to locate in Findlay, and they are very interested in their ability to have a wind turbine. I think it's, in my opinion, I think it's a gold star that sets Findlay apart from other places. They see, oh, well, look at what your company's here. They've got 5 wind turbines supplying power to their factory. That's something we're interested in. So Right now, all the wind turbines are located in Allen Township, which has no zoning. So, someone could go up and put 4 more wind turbines up there tomorrow. So we want to be able to have companies in the city of Findlay and give them services that they want to have. I like this because it all goes back to having I-3 zoning is not a right. It's something that we decide upon as a community. So I-3 zoning, I think it'll, like agriculture, it'll be more rare than agriculture in my opinion, but at times and places where it's appropriate and it's beneficial to the community, we have that tool in our toolbox right away to provide that.
Okay, the wind turbine part, that was the missing piece, and you probably said it at the first meeting and I just missed it.
If
And
I
so
may
I
just-
appreciate it.
As Matt mentioned, when we looked at the different options, a key factor is the airport and protecting the airspace for access and potential future growth. Right now, some of the other options we looked at were like a wind turbine overlay. Well, if you have an overlay, then it opens up opportunity for turbines within certain areas, but then it can also be seen as, for lack of a better term, kind of punitive. You don't have a specific district that you're tying it to, so it doesn't give as much security to developers or property owners to say, if I have this zoning, I will be conforming, because you could have, it just gets a little messy. Additionally, providing that protection, again, also goes along, the wind turbines is the main thing, to allow properties to be compliant. So for example, if a property on our north end that currently has turbines wanted to annex, currently we do not have a zoning district that would both meet their industrial needs and allow for the wind turbines. And so that could be a deterring factor at this point in time.
The only other question is, does the height requirements for this, given that, does the height requirements make sense?
On the buildings or on the turbines?
Height requirements keep going down. Primary structure 60 feet, accessory structure 40 feet. What is a wind turbine considered?
That wouldn't fall under that same.
So I think adding a C, a footnote, just pointing out, with the exception of wind turbines, it would be appropriate. And again, I want to, I understand that wind turbines and solar power are touchy subjects for our community. In no way do I envision this as a way to, kind of get around the will of what the county commissioners have passed in the last 6 months or year, since they, this is not intended to harbor a wind farm, if you will. It's not intended for 75 wind turbines on 600 acres that just feed into the grid. This is really focused on a handful of wind turbines feeding into a factory. That's providing jobs and creating things in our community. Like I said, I just want to reiterate, this is not, in my mind, any way in response to what the commissioners passed and trying to make a way to allow those things. This is smaller scale, intended to serve businesses, whether it be solar or wind turbines, and giving the community the flexibility to allow it in a controlled fashion. And when someone requests I-3, it's going to be heavily scrutinized. Distance from the airport, distance from single-family homes. What effects will it have on our community? Whereas And I don't think the current wind turbines are causing any issues that I know of. I've not had any complaints, but those wind turbines had very little review. The city had essentially no say in those wind turbines because it's in an unzoned township. So when someone requests I3, my antenna's going up full go, and it's like we're looking at that site very carefully, and it's got to be the perfect site. It can't interfere with the airport. It can't interfere with, a single-family neighborhood that it's overlooking. It's going to be a special place that gets this zoning.
Did you consider a statement saying that solar and wind had to be consumed on premise, primarily consumed on premise versus just being created to feed the grid?
I thought about that a little bit, and I know we've had situations where we've kind of encouraged them to look at. I want to be sure, whatever statement that we might add, I want to make sure it could be on like the next parcel over type of situation.
Well, I think that was my whole thought there, was it needs to go to that business and not be into the grid. And I don't think that would factor into where it's at, if it's on a separate lot. If it's feeding a direct business, there's a reason to consider it. But then that eliminates opening up any can of worms for interpretation down the road to put in a farm of solar or a farm of wind.
So as I was speaking, I was like, I need to add some of this to the I3. So my only concern is I don't have any concerns talking about what the wind turbine is connected and kind of stating it needs to be connected to the purpose is to have it be connected to a business there. I do know a lot of the wind turbines are on maybe the parcel next to it. And I don't want to get into a confusion where, oh, well, the factory's on this parcel and the wind turbine's on the next parcel for different business reasons. So you can't do that. That's my only thing.
Would you then say it has, if it's,
So I think
If you
one
had
way
a-
to be able to address that is not, we could, so I think I was trying to find it here, but there's so much taken out. Cause in the solar, we have it specified, like it's your specific property or tied to the business within the region. And I think we could keep it more specific to, maybe it's Hancock County, providing power within Hancock County rather than like a regional thing.
I wouldn't even go there. Cause
This-
once it's on the grid, electricity is electricity is fungible. I mean, once it's on the grid, it's on the grid. And you can't say, hey, all these businesses say, hey, we're like 100% by wind power because we put a windmill up in North Dakota. That
Right.
sounds good, but
Yeah.
And I kind of agree. I'd like it to be a little tighter than that. So what I'll do is I'll make some change. I've
yeah,
heard the concerns, and I've even
okay.
brought the concerns to myself as I was talking. So I'd like to make some changes to that to give more confidence and to further define that the purpose of this I3 is really for powering a local business and not to like create a giant farm of
Correct.
alternative energy.
One other thought: can you have an I3 next to another zoned piece of property and have the I3 windmill feed the other zone, the building on the other zoning?
I would think so.
Okay.
So I will refine this some, and I think I've heard you guys, and I think I can get it to a pretty a better place.
Next item, if anybody have a request. Jim, do you want to give your report on the planned unit development? I reviewed I have no comments on the PUD. I think it's a good direction to go. I like the fact that we're doing that. I don't know if anybody else had.
No, this is a, this is a change I'm excited about as a nerdy planner. We've got two types of variations of a PUD, and no one has ever used them in the 12 or 14 years that they've been on the books. But there are occasions, this is a tool, again, I feel like one of the things that we can kind of say about this update is we're adding tools. I don't know how much we'll use them, the A1, the I3. The PUD, planned unit developments are kind of a staple of many codes across many different cities. And we changed it to try to make a better tool, and I think we found out we didn't. And so the PUD is kind of a staple, it's peanut butter and jelly of zoning. And so in fact, I think sometimes I meet with developers and they're like, we'd like to pursue a PUD. I was like, well, we don't really have one, and they're kind of taken back. So I think we're adding a very basic needed tool back into our code.
I just would concur with that. I agree with you. PUDs have been around for 40, 50 years, almost as long as I have. And I was surprised that we didn't have one here in Findlay.
Yeah. And, just the great benefit, one of the benefits is it's a negotiation between the developer and the city. And, we're essentially creating a new district for that project, and all the details of that are negotiated and worked out. And anything not mentioned in it refers back to our regular code. But, when you have important projects, someone really wanting to do something a little unique, as a community, the planning commission, the city council get to really dissect it, come to an agreement, meet their needs and meet the community's needs and move forward. So it's a very good tool.
Moving on, shall we jump into signs?
Sure.
Makes me busy.
We're almost there. Okay, so on the signage, probably one of the bigger changes is just wanting to pivot or move away from pylon signs. In my little handy dandy summary, a pylon sign is essentially a sign on a pole. It's generally 20 to 30 feet tall. A lot of communities have moved towards ground signs, which are generally 6 to 8 feet tall. They're mounted on the ground. They have landscaping around them. And generally, they're just considered more aesthetically pleasing. Planning Commission, over the last couple years, has kind of addressed this with projects as they come in. You'll notice, Turkey Hill has a ground sign. Dunkin' Donuts. If you look at any new project in the last 2 or 3 years, it has a ground sign. And almost all of them requested a pylon sign. So the main reason for removing pylon signs is for aesthetic reasons. It helps declutter kind of the view of a streetscape, and it's more pleasant to have ground signs. So what I put in front of you, there's a couple ways to handle kind of the future of pylon signs. And I looked at 3 different communities, and they had similar ways of what you call sunsetting them. So on this page, the blue is things that I added since the last time we met. So, important part is number 2. The substitution or interchanging of faces on non-conforming signs shall be permitted before the date of December 31st, 2032, it should read.
Gives them a long life.
After the date of December 31st, 2032, any change is made to the sign face, message, or structure. And this is completing the idea from above. A nonconforming sign shall immediately lose its nonconforming designation if. So, in standard terms, until 2032, you can change the face of the sign. So, we see sign face changes all the time on nonconforming signs.
Could you really quickly define change the face of a sign and what that really means to a layman like myself who does not know sign technology?
Yeah, so let's say you have Matt's Barbershop and it's on a pylon sign. What they do is they don't change the pole or the structure. They just take out the plastic that says Matt's Barbershop or whatever, and then they put in Jacob's sewing shop. So you don't.
We need a cobbler.
We're really on the cutting edge here. But you're essentially removing the plastic and putting up new plastic with a different name. Sometimes there are non-conforming signs in town where folks do that. And we generally don't require a permit just to change out the face. But if it's 5 by 5, you can't make it 5 by 6. So in this case, you're allowed to change out on a pylon sign for essentially the next 10 years. You're allowed to change out the face. On January 1st, 2033, giving a kind of a 10 years heads up, I cannot change. If I change the face of the sign, it loses its non-conforming status. It becomes a illegal sign and has to come down. So let's use an example. And maybe not, maybe I shouldn't. I was just thinking of my favorite pylon sign in the city of Findlay. And so if if a pylon sign has the same company, they don't have to take that 2040 comes along, that pylon sign can still be there if it's the same company and it's the same everything. But if wind blows it over, they have to replace it with a sign that meets the standard. If they want to change the face of the sign, they have to put a sign up that meets the standard.
So if they go through a rebranding campaign, they would have to change the sign.
Yes.
So then you mentioned when. So if we have El Derecho 2 on January 1st, 2033, and it causes lots of damage to signs, then they would be forced to change.
Yeah. If we currently pylon signs are permitted. If we remove them like I'm proposing, and we adopt this, and next January Derecho comes along, the sign, it's legal non-conforming, it gets destroyed, they have to replace it with a sign that meets our standards.
But if take that same scenario and the only thing that happened was that the plastic got cracked, are we going to allow them to change the sign face?
Until 2032.
Okay. This is very minor, but I would rather the date be 20. I would rather give them 10 plus years from date of implementation of the code versus, if you do 2032, we're already now less than 10 years because we haven't implemented. So I would rather it be like 2034, giving us X amount of time in this current year to implement, and then they get 10 years plus a handful of months. But that's real minor.
So, what I'd like to do, I don't like putting like 10 years from the adoption of this code, because sometimes if you repeal and replace, then there's a new date on there. So I do want to put a date.
Yes,
But
yes.
we can push
concur.
it forward to err on the side of more than 10 years
Correct,
than less than
yes.
10 years.
So then the challenge in this, and having sat on BZA, is that if we allow BZA, and I remember sign cases, I can think of 2 of them right off the top of my head from 20 plus years ago. If BZA has the right to, does BZA have the right to give a variance on this?
Let's see.
Because, I mean, they in essence can, depending on your composition of BZA, can override the intent of what we're trying to do here. And that really goes for pretty much anything in the code.
Can BZA, I know, I'm thinking through, you can reestablish a non-conforming use through city council. So you could reestablish the use of the sign through city council. You could get a height variance on a ground sign. That could be, that could be a creative way to, you know, I mean, with any of these things, there's almost always a workaround in some fashion. But the key is people in our community have to allow that workaround. I mean, I just named 2 right there off the top of my head. Get a variance on a ground sign. They're limited at 8 feet of height. I want my ground sign to be 30 feet tall. You can go to city council and request a reinstatement of a non-conforming use. And those tools are helpful because things are kind of wild. So you always need a way to help people out at different times.
Matt, if I may, isn't there a way that, in this ordinance, you could limit the amount of flexibility in some of this? Because if you allow, let's say it's in a district where you got, what'd you say, 6-foot height signs? That's the height restriction on a
Ground signs
sign.
are 8 feet, yeah.
8 feet, even that's pretty damn high. But, and if you start saying, well, you can go 9 feet, well, you could go 9.5, you begin sort of prostituting yourself, and the next person comes along and says, well, Billy Bob next door sign got some relief, it's 9 feet. I'd like mine to be 9.5 feet, and I think you're going down a slippery slope.
Well, and then I would remind the BZA or whoever that, you know, the courts have been very clear, land is complicated, and even though you're close together, the decision made on the mayor's property does not guarantee the same decision on my property. Meaning one determination does not set the standard forever and ever. If we gave a variance to allow a 10-foot sign somewhere in the city, and I come in and ask for a 10-foot sign and am denied, that's legal. You know, just because you gave it to someone. Now, if planning or BZA says, well, I gave it to Dennis because Dennis is my friend, and I'm not giving it to Grant because Grant cut my kid from soccer team, that's not legal. But if you say, I gave it to Dennis because his road is less busy, and I gave it to Grant because his, you know, there's a million different factors that are legitimate that you can look at.
I think signs, I mean, I get the low profile being wanted, and the businesses that have come into town, even though they weren't required, they really try to work with the city to try to find a happy medium. I don't see that our Tiffin Avenue is horrific to look at. I think when you have a mini strip or you have or had a mall, those types of higher signs are warranted, in my view, to be able, for a point of location, people can easily,
More easily?
there you go, thanks.
Right, right.
They can
Look,
identify a point saying, okay, if you make it to the mall sign and we're across the street or we're past the light and we're on the left, I think and it's also, to me, it's very conforming because it'll list all the main businesses on the front of the mall or in that mini strip that I don't think is an issue. I know when I had the building on Tiffin and Bright, that was an electronic sign, but there was a lot of grandfathering going on. There was a lot of changing and saying, oh, you have to change this whole sign. I'm like, I don't think so. And we had to go through a lot of issues which brought up the electronic sign situation, which to me, I see more issues trying to control those high profile signs, billboards, electronic signs, and the distance between them before having a conformity for a mini strip or for a mall that's a base point. And so I hate to say, okay, yep, you know, he's my buddy, I'm gonna give it to him and you cut me from soccer. People can make an issue out of anything because people can interpret and then it just gets ugly and that slippery slope starts happening.
Sure.
So I don't know how you implement it and put a date on there and say at this date you can't have it anymore.
And the it only after that date you can't change the sign face. Now thinking of your building, it's in some ways your building brings up a little bit of sympathy in this, you know, with 15 different squares. And one of those changes, you know, does the sign have to come down? And according to this, yes. I guess you clicked your thing, and I'm floundering. So go ahead.
Well, I was going to just add, you know, I think one of the key things to keep in mind is zoning codes cannot and will not address every single situation. That's why we have a method for appeal through BZA and a process for consideration. And I think, you know, Holly, that's a great example of multi-tenant signage, which we're actually talking about at design review because of a request that has come up. But I think that that's a prime example of when you have a large parcel with multi-tenants, they would probably be two of them to then request a variance from that typical signage for the size of sign to address it. So I think that, you know, a couple of things, you know, if you don't know where a location is, you most likely are using a device to then navigate you to a location, right? If somebody's looking for something on Tappan Avenue and they don't know where it is, they're probably navigating. So I think there's also a transition of the necessity of large signs. Now, I think that this is a good balance because it is a long-term transition. We may have signs that are going to be here for another 50 years that are the pylon signs. But I think it is a good design process to try to clean it up some. And I would also note that this doesn't change the sign abilities around highways, right? You have those large pylon signs off of highways that are addressed differently. So that's some of the thoughts on that item.
Interesting point on the phone being the navigation tool. Not that anybody uses a phone while they drive, at least not in Ohio anymore. But yeah, that's an interesting point. One of the for the multi-tenant, maybe you look at percentage of sign face that's changed in requiring the replacement. So if you're replacing 100% of the sign face or the skin or whatever, but if it's just one little square, just as a thought towards how to make that work a little bit more, but just as a general comment, you know, the strategic planning input that we've received from the community has had a lot of items about aesthetics of the community, and one of the things that I think they mean is, or part of the aesthetics is signage, and so you know, I appreciate the direction we're trying to go, and trying to be very mindful of the investment that businesses put into signs. So I like what's happening here.
So, and when and this maybe isn't super pertinent, but when you say, if we put, you can change up to, 50% of the sign face. Well, then someone will change half of it one week and then the other half the next week. I've seen billboard companies, we had a rule in it, they would replace parts of the billboard about every other week. One side arm that month. Next month they do the top side arm, and then one pot. So there's always a way around things. That's just kind of a. But I think the mayor said it well in that there are good candidates, and your building is probably one of them, where variances and things can help address, because we can't. One of the traps that we've fallen into before is trying to write things that works 100% of the time, and that's impossible.
But do you want to take this building owner and make them go through a BZA process every time they have a tenant change out?
And they pay a fee too.
No, I would be in favor of a variance that grants them the ability to change them out however they want for a period of years. Because I want to be user-friendly too.
Do we want to?
So removing pylon signs. One of the one of the things that we don't do is regulate wall signs. So you can, I go back and forth on this. We don't regulate wall signs. You can put as large of a sign on the wall, on your building as you want, and as many signs as you want. Saying that statement, I would think things would look a lot worse. If you told me there's a community that doesn't regulate wall signs, you can put as large as you want, you can put as many as you want, I wouldn't expect it to look as nice as ours sign. Everyone's pretty much gone with a size that's somewhat appropriate. At the same time, as a planner, every community I've worked in has had wall sign standards, and you are required a permit to change your wall sign. So I did, there's quite a few pretty much standard type wall sign standards, and so I've put those in there. I can be convinced either way. Honestly, I mean, to me, it has not. I can't think of one glaring bad example of a wall sign in Findlay gone wrong because we don't have standards.
For the sake of the visual part of me, I'm looking for some examples. I was wondering, do you consider on Dorney Plaza out towards Main Street the sign that hangs there that says they have space available in that building? Is that considered a wall sign? It's on the as you walk out Dorney, it's on the wall on the right in the top corner of the Rooney. It lays flat. I believe it is like a tarps type sign.
I would consider that a temporary banner.
Which
That's
is a whole other issue.
Okay. Would you
And it's in the
consider
downtown district.
go
and it's for
north
sale.
on Main Street, the pizza place just on this side of the river that has the eat pizza and be good termed? I believe it's Dougie John's. Is that a wall sign?
It is Dougie John's. It's my favorite place to get lunch. They make a wonderful salad.
Cauliflower pizza.
I would consider that more a mural. Now,
So then can you give an example of when you say wall signs that went good, are there specific examples that are that you think about?
Walmart says Walmart. All the strip centers have a sign, Penn Station, Pet Supplies Plus, anything, mounted on.
So above the door,
Yeah,
You're
part of the
at-
structure of the building sign.
You're asking which ones aren't good, right?
No, I'm just trying to get examples of what is considered a wall sign.
Yeah, so any of the channel lettering on any of the buildings is considered a wall sign.
or a box cabinet.
We don't
or-
regulate any of that right now, and I don't really see any issues with it, the way that we're doing it right now. The only time that we may run into an issue is if somebody puts up a digital sign on a building, which Chatland Signs has one currently. The building that Holly was talking about earlier has a TV on the side of their building. Those are wall signs that may
That's a
need to.
billboard, though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's a fine line of whether it's a sign or a billboard.
I thought when a business came in, we regulated their sign. They had to get approval what's physically on the building.
The
No.
only time we do that is if it's in downtown,
In downtown.
in the C3 district.
So they do present it as part of your plans, but right now we really don't have the ability to regulate it because we don't have anything in there, which is why, so like Lone Depot is an example. Again, that's a downtown building, but if they weren't in the design review district, they could have technically put one that was 50 feet wide on the side of their building.
I think our saving grace is signage is pretty darn expensive. You know, channel lock letters and those things can get very expensive very quickly. But
So now the signs that we do regulate downtown are anything projecting over the city right away. So any apron, awning, or any projecting sign like,
Like trends? Like that
Findlay
on-
Brewing has one that hangs out from the building, so it projects outwards.
Logan's,
Logan's, we do regulate those
But-
to make sure that they meet current zoning standards.
it's regulated outside of the design review, which is also part of the zoning. And I have added as a note, some downtown size, guidelines, to help assist the design review, board and to present guidelines to folks looking to develop in downtown.
So I'm a proponent of this because I do think it is one of those scenarios where we can put relatively broad parameters that protect from an issue. I'm not a big fan of addressing something once an issue has come up, because then it seems like you're just picking on someone. So I would rather put standards in place that are appropriate, and as we have done in the past, if we start getting a lot of zoning appeals, then we reevaluate the standards that are in place to see if they truly are a hardship. So I am a proponent of putting these standards in place.
So Matt, as I understand it, what you said, this is gonna be the first time that we have regulated wall signs.
Correct. And what we're looking to regulate is simply just size. So these guidelines kind of how much frontage you have, how far you are away, there's different levels. So this is actually how far away you are from the property line. You get different size.
I don't understand number 2. When you say it's 50 to 149 feet from the lot line, but I thought they were on the structure of the building. So I guess maybe
Yeah, the building being that far away, so you can have larger ones. So for example, a building that's 25 feet from another building or from their lot line, you're gonna want a smaller signage than a Walmart that is way far back. You're having kind of a larger building.
So there's 2 criteria: how close you are essentially to the front lot line, how close you are to the street. So if you're this excludes the downtown district, but if you're like a downtown building and you're close, then you get 1.5 square feet, not to exceed 50 square feet. You get 1.5 square feet per lineal foot of the structure, not to exceed 50. If you're further set back, so let's go way back, your Walmart, you get 3 square feet per lineal foot of structure, capped at 150 square feet.
Just
So-
a visualization of it so that you have.
But it's all attached. It's all a strip.
Yep.
aside, and you say how Walmart sits back, but every store attached to it sits back the same, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's those buildings that are closer to the street. There's one in the corner there that has, I think
Biology.
Sally Beauty or has a coffee shop in there. So that they would have a smaller standard versus the ones that are set back?
Yeah.
Is that the example? Okay.
Because of how much their frontage of their physical space is, not of the entire building. Because that's I look at it as one entire strip mall.
So it's
Here, let me try.
okay.
So there's two components. How far away from most likely the person driving by? So how far away from you are you going to be able to see the building and the signage? And then the frontage overall to help regulate how much space you should be taking up. So, for example, the building closer to the road is going to have a smaller linear foot, but also they'll have their frontage considered for the size.
Well, that's like Froggy ice cream, whatever.
Sweet Frog.
That's a separate building that sits closer to the road. I'm just not getting the main strips that are in the back. They're all one continuous. They don't sit out
So
further.
they will, and that's where the lineal footage. So let's say,
So they're at A and not, they're at A1 and
no,
not
so
2A.
Bellacino's, which is the smaller storefront, same distance back as Walmart. Bellacino's, let's say it's probably bigger than this, but let's say it's 30 feet wide. That's actually probably fairly accurate. They get 3 square feet for every foot that they are wide. So 3 times 30, they get 90 square feet. Up to 90 square feet, which is 9 by 10, and I will bet, wait, no, that's not, sorry,
It's 1.5 feet, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
No, it would be 3 square feet, and they would get 90 square feet. So so that's 90 square feet would be, 3 by 30. I mean, like
Well,
you could.
I'm on page now. I'm mixing the height.
I guarantee
line.
you that Bellacino's sign is smaller than what is allowed here.
Well, that actually feeds into a question, is as you look at the existing sign and inventory in Findlay, if these things were in place, are there any signs that you think would be pushing the limits of what is allowable? And boy, what a tough challenge it would be to kind of look to apply, but it would be kind of interesting to know if we're even remotely close as a way to judge whether these are truly accommodating enough. If you told me you implemented this and we instantly made 75% of our wall signs non-conforming, I would say, hey, our standards are too tight.
Sure.
If you told me that I instantly made 0% of our wall signs non-conforming, then I said, okay, good. We're in our right. We're closer to the right path. Is that even a possible? Can you even possibly do that?
The only thing that we can reasonably do is look at about one. It's difficult to know how large a sign is on a wall because I can't get up there and measure it easily, and I'm really tall. Yeah, so we could look at a few examples and make sure we're on the right track. I have a feeling we are on the right track. I agree with you. We want to be in that sweet spot where we're making very, very few, if any, legal non-conforming, and we're really looking to prevent anything really wacky that comes our way. Someone that really wants to just blow it out and make this giant sign.
Per my predecessor, that's part of the reason though that we haven't regulated anything now is they can submit something, but how do I get up to that building to measure the size of the sign itself exactly without a boom truck or something?
Your
So,
predecessor was wrong. Sorry, Todd.
but that's part of the reason why.
Everyone, all communities, most communities, a decent amount. Your larger communities and suburbs all have wall sign standards, and they all prevail without. There's some trust in that they say they're certifying they're putting up a 30-foot square foot sign. You know, and if they put up a 31 square foot, are we going to catch that? But if something giant shows up, you know that's not right.
Matt,
Look-
have you, I'm certain that you have, but I wanted to ask it anyways. Have you compared this proposal on the sign ordinance with other communities, or a community that you think is right on in terms of their sign restrictions?
Yeah, I did not make this
Standards.
up. I took this from another community. I'd have to look and see which one. But when I look at, because us planners are very,
Plagiarize.
we're great plagiarizers. So I can't remember, it's been a while, but it was taken from a community that I thought was doing things very well.
Carmel?
Not Carmel, no.
Carmel, Indiana.
Carmel, excuse me.
And part of that is, it's an understanding of who Findlay is. I'm not looking at Beverly Hills for standards, because I'm looking at Marion and Perrysburg and other places that I feel are somewhat similar to Findlay and
New
have,
Albany, something like that.
theirs might be a little more too strict for us.
We can kind of set our standards high, is what I'm encouraging.
No, I'm not looking at, I'm not looking at communities that I think do things incorrectly. So
Understand. Thank you.
it's still aspirational, but reasonable.
In light of time, I know that I'm probably the only one here that doesn't have a pressing commitment. It's already, we've been doing this an hour and 10 minutes, and I know Matt and I could talk for 3 hours on signs and zoning. Can we go to just another 20 minutes, try to get through solar and animals and any other business?
Yep.
Is that good with the committee?
Yep.
Okay.
One last thing on signs. We do address digital signs. My effort is to reduce them and their address so that there are less of them. But yes, Brian.
Just a quick question on the digital billboards. So I guess there was kind of a specific question that I had come up. Are we regulating like the number of flips?
Yes.
What are those figures, and do you envision changing those at all?
No. The number. Number of it's 8. It can change every 8 seconds, and that's kind of digital billboard industrial or industry standard. Now it can change to 50 different things, but they can't change faster than 8 seconds.
I think we need to clarify, though, digital signs are different than billboards.
So I didn't, with our time frame here. So digital signage, essentially, in previous years, 4 or 5 years ago, it was interpreted, in my opinion, incorrectly, in that if you were allowed a 300 square foot sign, and it said 25% of that can be digital, what the city would allow you to do is not put up the rest of the sign, and you could then just take the 25, you could only put up the 25% that was digital. Do you understand what I'm saying? The intent, and what I believe has always been the intent, is to have a physical sign of which most of it is static and then a little bit is digital. But previously, they would allow you to not construct the static part and just allow you to construct just the digital part. And so I clarified it, so that's not what the intent of this ordinance is.
Do you have an example?
Well, and I guess I was talking about like the fairgrounds, the sign that they have out there. I guess that was my question, the number of flips that a sign like that could is it still 8 seconds, or?
I would have to look. I'm excited for it's been interpreted a lot of different ways over the years, and I'm excited to clean this up.
Okay.
There were some that it was 3 minutes or 15 minutes.
Every
15
15
minutes.
minutes. So the county fairgrounds should be flipping once every 15 minutes. Whenever it was installed, it was considered a fixed message center, and that was part of the fixed message. It had to stay static for 15 minutes at a time.
And then a separate topic, digital billboards and billboards are separate. And the way to address those, there are distances. Currently, the distances are about, that you can't have them closer than 500 feet, in some cases 1,000 feet. What we did was we increased that to 2,500 feet. So essentially by doing that, we're essentially freezing in time the permitted billboards that there are.
So in other words, making the fairgrounds and Blanchard Valley compliant because they are so close.
They're
Those
not
aren't
the
billboards.
same.
Those aren't, they're different, yeah.
And we're not allowing billboards to convert over to digital, correct? But with the square footage,
In essence, most likely, no. It can't be within, because I will answer that further to clarify. I just want to make sure I'm giving you the right answer.
okay,
But in general, no.
yeah. We're gonna maintain that 2,500 feet in between.
Yes.
So if they have a regular billboard, they cannot convert that.
What I'm
over.
not sure of is there a digital billboard or a non-digital billboard that's 2,500, that's more than 2,500 feet away from another non-digital billboard. I just want to look at that.
Yeah, one thing we always ask for is they to give us a radius when they apply for billboards, so we'll be able to tell exactly what the distance is. And if there's one that sits within that circumference, they would not be allowed to convert it if that is the case.
So they have to get that permitted to switch it over.
So they would have to get
So
it
they already
permitted
have
to
a
switch it
billboard
from
location.
static to digital.
That's
Yeah.
what I wanted to know.
With the sunsetting, I guess there's an opportunity. I don't suggest it. And as it's written, one could interpret it the sunsetting to include billboards. My intent is really for only pylon signs. Simply almost because, I mean, if we do this with billboards, we will be sued.
So in essence, what you just said is we will also clarify that billboards are not considered pylon signs for.
Yes.
Easy stuff, solar and animals.
Since we circulated it, thoughts, concerns, comments on this? On the solar, we do specify principal solar energy system so that it is providing it to the specific residence or immediately adjacent to the entity that it's providing, to clarify that it is not solar farms. Any comments on the solar?
This would allow, a resident who wishes to have solar, this still allows that. Where they might run into trouble is their covenants and restrictions with their HOA, but zoning wise with the city, they won't have an issue.
And that is currently permitted. We did just clean up some of the screening and requests, like, to kind of protect the neighbors. Okay, comments on animals? I
must admit, when reading the animals, I neighbors who have, not direct neighbors, but, folks in the neighborhood who have animals, and I would challenge anybody to find them unless they knew specifically, because they do it in a, you know, in the right way, for lack of a better term. And I'm challenged, and I don't want this to be construed as trying to take away that, what they have. I'm a little concerned about the definition of having things behind the house versus side yard, and I understand that side yard, because if you're in a corner lot, all of a sudden that becomes potentially more challenging. I wondered about the lack of saying that they should be enclosed in some kind of fencing, so that so for a non-visibility, and whether that's appropriate. Reading this, it almost looked like we were also saying that animals cannot be only in cages, that they had to have the ability to have fenced yards, that they could have room to roam. I think when we put this out to the general public, I'll really be interested to hear what the Lou Cooks and others of the world, how they interpret it, knowing what our intent is, which is the fact that we have nothing at this point in time. And if my neighbor wants to raise a llama, they you know, there's nothing that says that they, per se, that says that they couldn't, and we're trying to put that protection in. So nothing jumped off the page is particularly, but I also admit I just don't have, this is so out of my realm.
Yeah, so I again, yeah, you know, we're going to put this out for feedback. To that point, this section, we went to some of the local experts with some members of the Fair Board and 4-H and the Ohio State Extension Office, Agriculture Extension Office, to get their feedback on it, because we definitely want to find that balance of, you know, we recognize that people have animals for individual use or are participating in 4-H. We want to allow that while also protecting the neighborhoods and having some standards in place. So I think this is a good starting point, and, you know, welcome feedback as we move forward to make sure that it's appropriate.
On that point, what is the intent for feedback? We're gonna put this out for a month to get feedback, or have you talked about that at all?
Yeah, so as I mentioned just kind of at the beginning, what I would propose is following today's meeting, we'll clean up some of the different language, maybe make some of the modifications that were discussed, and then by our date, you know, as soon as we get it done, but no later than next Friday, put it up on our website, do a release that it's up for public view, and then we would create a little contact form that people could submit feedback through that would go, I would recommend either that it all goes to Matt and we kind of collect it, then send it out to you guys all in a group, or if you want, we can just create it so that it generates an email and sends to all of you at the same time, whatever you would request there. For at least a couple of weeks, I was thinking, I think it's 3 weeks if we got it done by next Friday, to have February 3rd, which would be the Friday before your next meeting, so that we could then collect and discuss the feedback at your next meeting, I think, which is February 9th. And then depending on the level of feedback and, you know, level of concern, then obviously we'll have to work through modifications, and then we would put out kind of a formal draft, again, for public comment, go to city planning for discussion, and kind of move through the general process then before it goes to city council, and then the standard readings there.
Seems reasonable to me, thank you.
Yep. Okay.
And also at the February meeting, we still have the moratorium on the small box and the games of chance. And I was looking through the C1 in further detail, and I think that is something that deserves conversation by the committee and all. And even though it's not something that's been heavily modified, I think it got some obvious attention with the south end proposal, and it is worthy of further conversation.
Are we good on those items? I do have one other item to discuss.
Yeah.
And I did confirm with the law director that I could share it with you since it wasn't specifically on the agenda. But as you recall, at the last meeting, we discussed the annexation process. So the folder that I gave to you all is the plan that I plan to start executing upon. I did have it on there to have a formal committee. You know, you guys say proceed, but since it was not on there, we'll go ahead and move forward unless I get something, you know, get the evil eye here. So what I provided to you all is just the kind of tentative timeline of communication, press releases, public meetings. Obviously, this would all be subject to change as needed. And then drafts of the communication that have been put together. The first item is the letter that would go to properties that have an annexation agreement on file. The second is properties that do not have an annexation agreement on file. The third item is the letter of interest to annex that would be permitted for properties to say that they're interested in annexing if they're not one of the properties that is contacted. And then the final items is the current copy of FAQs that is available on the city website. So I would just ask that you all take a look at that, and if you have any concerns or comments or would like to sit down and go through it with me, that you reach out. But this is the plan that you all have supported over the last couple of months, and kind of just more detail on how I plan to execute that. Any questions, comments, concerns on that? If you could, look at it the next couple of days, because I would like to move forward with starting putting mailings and all of that together, hopefully that following week, to keep us moving. That is it for me.
I mean, I guess, I don't know what your feelings are, Grant, but, I mean, I looked over it, you know, I don't necessarily.
Make the comments directly to the mayor, not in the meeting, where she passed it out. This is not on the agenda
Okay,
for discussion. That was an explanation of what she passed out and the process she wants to go forward, but we're not having a discussion on it. And with that, I have making a motion for our recommendation that we continue discussion of zoning code updates, that non-content cleaning up of the code, that continues. And that's in essence fixing the grammatical errors, the misspellings, the formatting, and that we publish it on the website for public comment. And that is in a form of a motion for our recommendation. Is there a second? Thank you, so I don't have to rewrite it.
You gonna open that up for discussion?
Yeah.
I haven't, when you say non-content, what was that again?
Non-content cleaning up of the code. So in other words, all the spelling errors, all the grammatical errors, all of the formatting errors, all of the bullet points that are not in consecutive order, things to that effect.
So just real quick, little background. We had part of the previous Word version of the code was in horrible shape. So we had someone retype it, and there are some errors in that process that our office is going to fix.
Okay.
So in the document that I handed you, you'll see sometimes there's a chapter that's missing its context. We're going to go through the codified one and make sure and compare it to make sure we're in good shape.
Okay,
Or the fact that these are stuff like that.
all right.
Because eventually, if you remember, our previous code was, we had it in a format that was much easier to consume than this. This is literally a draft, and so I just wanted that effort to continue to happen.
I'm good.
So we recommend continued discussion of the zoning code updates. Non-content cleaning up of code continues, and publish code on website for public comment.
Just for clarification, did you want me to make kind of the suggested changes that
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, take the input from what we had.
Can you put
Just
that
double checking.
into the motion, just to say we discussed agricultural and give a quick bullet, we do it.
Well, that would be on our minutes.
but
This,
where's
this
the
is our,
minute?
this is our recommend,
So you're gonna do minutes attached.
I'm gonna do minutes, refer to the, refer to the video. But that's not a recommendation of what we talked about.
Well, but if we're gonna recommend him to update those changes, I think we should bullet them in the minutes, so then if somebody wants to
Okay,
watch the video.
do you wanna start telling me what changes we're gonna make?
So, Matt, what do you have down for the change for agricultural?
I don't wanna go through that. Make changes per
Well, but I would just
conversations
say,
of today's meeting.
but I would focus on the things we talked about.
I've taken notes, and rewatching the video will also help enhance my notes so that I can make sure I fully understand kind of the directions that we went with some of these conversations. I mean, just off the top of my head, agriculture, I'm going to remove some of those uses, look at changing the size from 5 to 10 acres.
And I'm just asking,
Yeah.
on the committee report, I think it's important that council sees more of a discussion a little bit, so they know what we're focusing on, so they can I'm not saying it to be overly specific, but we didn't really get into the residential side or anything. We focused on agricultural, we focused on signage, and we focused on,
The I-3.
So I added this to make changes per the conversation of today's meeting. I added that as a previous bullet. There will be minutes. The minutes are the meeting. I can write on here the areas that we discussed on the minutes. And that is a motion. Brian, do you still second with the addition of make changes per? And so that's a motion and a second. All in favor of that as our recommendation, please say aye. And considering that's all four. And with that, no other business, adjourned. Move for adjourn, second. All in favor? Thank you. Jake, do you wanna take care of the,